If you are enjoying this content, please like, subscribe. If you would like to get a cozy, slumbering seagull t-shirt, please click on the link below. Thank you. Silas Hayes slouched in his seat at the back of the classroom, trying his best to blend into the background. At 14 years old, he was used to feeling invisible. His messy blonde hair fell over his forehead, partially hiding his eyes. Unremarkable brown, except for a few tiny flecks of green that nobody ever seemed to notice. Born to busy parents who worked long hours, Silas had grown up mostly in the care of his elderly grandmother. She'd loved him dearly, but passed away when he was 10, leaving him even more alone. Now, with his parents constantly away on business trips, Silas spent most of his time in an empty house. His only company being the comic books he loved to read and the music he composed on his laptop that he was too afraid to share. At school, Silas was the kid nobody seemed to remember was there. He was smart, but rarely spoke up in class, too timid to raise his hand even when he knew the answer. Lunch periods were spent alone in the library, headphones in, listening to music, imagining himself as the brave hero he knew he could never be in real life. Friendless and painfully shy, Silas had convinced himself that he was simply meant to be insignificant. He told himself it was easier this way. No expectations, no disappointments. But deep down, in a part of himself he barely acknowledged, Silas yearned for adventure, for a chance to prove he was more than just a forgettable face in the crowd. Little did he know that his life was about to change. Disaster or divine intervention would soon launch him into an adventure beyond his wildest dreams. Attention students, it's time to announce the winners of our annual Innovators of Tomorrow contest. Principal Hawthorne's voice boomed through the speakers. Silas perked up slightly. He had entered the contest on a whim, submitting a detailed design for a sustainable underwater research station. It had been a solitary project born from countless hours spent reading marine biology books in the library and sparked by his fascination of Aquaman. This year, we had 2 standout entries that our judges couldn't choose between. So, for the first time ever, we'll be sending 2 students on the educational cruise. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Silas's heart began to race, though he quickly squashed the spark of hope. There was no way he could win. Our first winner, Principal Hawthorne paused for effect, is Leroy Jackson. The auditorium erupted in cheers as Leroy, a popular junior, known for his athleticism and easy charm, made his way up to the stage, grinning from ear to ear. And our second winner, Principal Hawthorne continued once the noise died down, is Silas Hayes. For a moment, Silas thought he had misheard. The auditorium fell silent, then burst into confused whisper. "Who's Silas Hayes?" he heard someone nearby. Feeling every eye in the room searching for him, Silas slowly stood up, his legs shaking. As he made his way to the stage, he could hear the whispers following him. The sound of clapping slowly grew for him from less than half the room this time around. "Congratulations, Silas," Principal Hawthorne said, shaking his hand. "Your underwater research station design was truly impressive." Silas mumbled a quiet "thank you" as he stood awkwardly next to Leroy, who clapped him on the back with a friendly, if slightly puzzled, smile. Leroy and Silas will be embarking on a 2-week educational cruise this summer where they'll work with leading scientists and innovators, Principal Hawthorne announced. As the assembly disappeared, Silas found himself face to face with Leroy. "Hey man, congrats," Leroy said, extending his hand. "I guess we'll be shipmates this summer. Your project must have been pretty awesome to tie with my solar-powered water purifier." Silas shook Leroy's hand, managing a small smile. "Thanks. Yours sounds impressive too." As Leroy was pulled away by his friends, Silas stood alone on the stage, a mix of excitement and terror swirling in his stomach. He had no idea how to handle this sudden attention or the adventure that awaited him. But for the first time in years, he felt a glimmer of something he'd almost forgotten: hope. The educational cruise had been a dream come true for Silas. For once, he didn't feel like an outsider. He was surrounded by scientists and fellow students who shared his passion for learning. Even Leroy, who Silas had expected to ignore him, had become a friendly presence. On the 5th day of the journey, as Silas stood at the railing watching dolphins play in the ship's wake, an alarm blared across the deck. "This is not a drill," the captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "We are under attack. All passengers report to your muster stations immediately." Panic erupted. Silas froze, his mind blank with fear. Suddenly, Leroy was at his side, grabbing his arm. "Come on, Silas, we need to move." They ran towards the designated muster station, but chaos had already engulfed the ship. Gunshots rang out, and Silas caught a glimpse of the rough-looking men boarding the vessel. "Pirates?" Leroy muttered in disbelief. As they rounded a corner, they saw pirates herding passengers and crew members together. Leroy pulled Silas into a nearby storage closet. "They're taking over the ship," Leroy whispered. "We need to find a way off." Silas nodded, trembling. "But how?" Leroy peered out of the closet. "There's a lifeboat on the lower deck. If we can reach it, we might have a chance." Carefully, they made their way through the ship, dodging pirates and using Leroy's knowledge of the vessel's layout to stay hidden. Finally, they reached the lifeboat. "Quick, help me lower it," Leroy said. Together, they managed to deploy the lifeboat and climb in. As they began to row away from the hijacked cruise ship, Silas looked back, worry etched on his face. "What about the others?" he asked. Leroy's jaw clenched. "We can't help them right now. We need to get to safety and find help." As they rowed further from the ship, the sea began to turn. Dark clouds gathered overhead, and the waves grew larger. "We need to be careful," Leroy shouted over the growing wind. "A storm's coming." But even as he spoke, a massive wave rose before them. Silas's eyes widened in terror as the wall of water crashed down on their small boat. "Hold on!" Leroy yelled, reaching for Silas. The wave hit with tremendous force, capsizing their lifeboat. Silas felt Leroy's hand slip from his grasp as he pulled under the churning water. When he surfaced, gasping for air, the lifeboat was upside down, and Leroy was nowhere to be seen. "Leroy?" Silas screamed, his voice lost in the howling wind. He managed to grab onto the overturned lifeboat, clinging to it as waves crashed over him. As the storm raged on, Silas found himself alone, adrift in the vast ocean, with no sign of Leroy or the hijacked cruise ship. Leroy groaned as he regained consciousness. The rough cave floor beneath him, a stark contrast to the gentle waves that had carried him ashore. He sat up, wincing at his sore muscles, and peered out of the large cave that had sheltered him from the night's downpour. The lush, unfamiliar landscape before him would have been breathtaking, if not for the heavy weight on his chest. "Silas," he whispered, memories of the storm and their separation flooding back. Leroy's eyes stung as tears began to fall. He wiped them away roughly, trying to compose himself. "Come on, Jackson, pull it together," his father's strong voice echoing in his mind. Colonel Jackson, a decorated war hero, had always emphasized the importance of bravery and leadership. Though his deployments meant he wasn't always around, the time they spent together was filled with love, laughter, and valuable life lessons. Leroy could almost hear his father's words. "A true leader never leaves a man behind." The thought made his chest tighten. Had he failed? Had he let down not only Silas, but also his father by losing the younger boy in the storm? "I'm sorry, Dad," Leroy whispered, fresh tears falling. "I tried to protect him, I really did." He thought of his mother, always supportive and understanding, balancing out his father's military strictness with her gentle nature. What would she say if she knew he'd lost Silas? Leroy took a deep, shaky breath, trying to steady himself. "No," he said aloud, his voice growing stronger. "I haven't failed yet. Silas could still be out there." Standing up, Leroy squared his shoulders and looked out at the mysterious island. "I'm going to find you, Silas," he promised, "whatever it takes." With renewed determination, Leroy stepped out of the cave. He may have lost Silas in the storm, but he wasn't going to give up. His parents had raised him to be resilient, to keep fighting no matter the odds, and that's exactly what he was going to do. As he began to explore his surroundings, Leroy held on to hope. Somewhere on this island, Silas might be doing the same, and Leroy was determined to reunite with him, to make things right, and to live up to the example his father had set.